Hi, this is Martin with RPM Motorsports. So we recently released our RPM K04 Super-Cores. So these are our Stage 3 turbochargers that we've had available to the the public for quite some time now, and they've been hugely successful. Part of the reason that makes them hugely successful is, basically they come in the same exact footprint as your stock K04, but what we do and what makes them unique is we take the compressor cover, disassemble the turbocharger, we mill out the compressor cover on a lathe. We then in turn have a proprietary billet wheel, which is actually a good bit larger than the stock cast wheel. And then on top of that, we also upgrade your thrust bearing inside the center cartridge, as well as a beefier center shaft. And then we reassemble everything, and then everything's balanced on a digital balance wheel. So these are a great alternative to someone who doesn't want to have to go through the extent of different exhaust manifolds, different downpipes. They want a 100% drop-in solution that's going to afford them, anywhere from that 380 to 400 crank horsepower realm, which is, we don't really like to go over 400 crank horsepower unless you're going to upgrade the fueling system anyway. So our Stage 3 kits are a really good option for someone who has a bone stock car and really wants to get the most out of the motor on a budget without having to really dive in and go for internals or upgrading the fueling system. But back to our Super-Cores. So our Super-Cores were released last week, and this is basically what comes with your Super-Core. So you're going to get the pre-milled compressor cover with the larger billet wheel and the upgraded center cartridge. And that's your meat and potatoes of the upgraded turbocharger. So one would ask, why wouldn't I just buy an entirely assembled turbo? Well, some people are a little bit more mechanically inclined than others, and they want to be able to save a buck here and there. So this is a lesser expensive option, which basically allows you to reuse some of the components off of your factory turbocharger. And what we're going to do here today is really quickly, I've been getting this question a lot lately, so I wanted to shoot this video. Is this something that I can do in my home garage, or should I send the turbo to you, have you guys swap it over, or have my local mechanic do it? And I just kind of want to go through this process real quick with you of what it really takes and what it entails to take a Super-Core that you would receive in the mail from us and take your turbocharger that you've pulled off your car and make that switch. I would have to say that this is, out of a difficulty level of 1 to 5, this is probably a 3. A lot of people get nervous when, disassembling the turbochargers, and honestly, I don't blame you. But it's really not that difficult, and we're going to kind of go through that here. So our base Super-Core is going to come with, like I said, your upgraded compressor cover and your center cartridge. As additional options, you can get a freshened up recirc valve, wastegate actuator, etc., etc. You're going to need basic tools for this. Pair of pliers, 10mm wrench, a T27 Torx bit, and a socket and ratchet. So what I like to do is, now this is an OEM turbo that we got from General Motors. We're going to use this as the turbo that was pulled off of our vehicle with, let's say, 90,000 miles, etc. I mean, it's all going to be the same. Obviously, the one you pull off your car is going to be dirty, heavily used, etc. So let's just go ahead and dive into this real quick. So we've pulled this off the car. We've removed obviously your oil feed line, your coolant lines, your oil drain line, and you're left with really what would be your turbocharger. The first thing that I like to do is remove the internal recirc valve. Now, depending on how many miles are on your vehicle, this may be a good time to upgrade or just freshen this up. These do have a rubber diaphragm inside that, they get brittle over time, etc. And I'm using a 10mm socket here, and I'm just removing. Now, this last one, be careful because there is a spring behind this and it is under pressure. Not a lot of pressure, but a little bit of pressure. So if you remove that, there's your spring, there's your diaphragm. And again, these are made of rubber. This is a high heat area, so this, you know, could require replacement, and we do offer those through the RPM website. So now that we've got that off, we're going to move on to our boost control solenoid. Now again, as these vehicles get older, these are starting to fail more and more. You know, here we are in 2019, and we probably send one of these a week out to a customer somewhere in the world just because their OEM one has failed. So using a pair of pliers, you're basically going to just quickly take these clamps, slide them back. You're then in turn going to take your T25 bit, and I've already loosened this one up. We're just going to take and do that, and that's going to loosen up your actuator here. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to pull these off. We're going to spin this bad boy around, and the last one to come off is obviously on your wastegate actuator. So just give it a good tug and twist. You might want to use your pliers for that. Now that we've got that off, we are going to go after your wastegate actuator. So, you know, the wastegate actuator on your turbocharger is essentially what regulates your boost temperature, or your boost pressure. The K04s by default come with a 5-pound spring. So if this were bypassed, not using your boost control solenoid, essentially this is going to extend, or it's going to throw out and open up your wastegate at 5 psi. So a lot of people say, you know, my car went into power reduction mode and all I've got is 5 psi. That's because the computer is basically telling this not to do anything, and it wants to bypass. And you're operating on the wastegate the wastegate spring pressure. So to get this off, there's a little keeper here. So we're just going to take and pop that off. And obviously when GM sends these out, they mark these. So I've got a little bit deeper of a 10 millimeter here. We're going to save all of our nuts and bolts, and we're just going to slide that wastegate actuator back. And then what we're going to do here is, you got 3 10 millimeter bolts, which I've already loosened up. And we're going to take and we're going to remove those as well. Now I'm going to go back to our swivel head here. Again, we want to keep track of all of our bolts, and this is your wastegate actuator. So again, we do offer these as an upgrade, or not so much an upgrade but a replacement. So if you're tearing your turbo down, again, this is not a bad time to replace some of these items. Now the last thing we've got here is the C-clamp, and we're going to take this off again, 10 millimeter all the way around. I'm going to take that, we're going to remove that. Now this is a new turbo, so yeah, it's going to come off nice and easily. So you saw how easily that came off. Now a turbo that has, you know, any significant mileage on it, this is going to be heat soaked. That may not come off. And that's where you get your hammer out. Now, we don't want you to go charging at this like, you know, Thor would. But what we do want you to do is maybe get a little torch, heat up this center cartridge a little bit, give a little tap. Eventually those will separate, and they should do so relatively easily. Now, this is again a nice brand new turbine housing. I want to point out a few things with the turbine housings. While you have this off the car, it's a good time to inspect them. This is your scroll divider. You've heard these are twin scroll turbochargers. This is your scroll divider. In 99 out of 100 turbos, you're gonna find a crack either here or here. Those are normal. General Motors has identified that as an expansion crack, and it is there. Now, if you see one crack and it goes down, you're probably okay. If you see multiple cracks starting to form, you may want to give us a call, get yourself a new turbine housing. And the only reason that is one crack is probably okay. This is not in any kind of danger, but if you have multiple cracks forming, then you run the risk of a piece of metal splintering off, going into your turbocharger, and potentially taking out the whole caboodle. So the other part of the turbo that we want to talk about is right in here. We want you to get in there, and we really want you to look at that. If there are no cracks down here, you're okay. Sometimes vehicles that are allowed to run lean for long periods of time will see that a crack is formed in here. If a crack is formed down here, we want you to discard the turbine housing. We want to play it safe. You paid good money for the Super-Core. Let's spend a couple $100, get you a new turbine housing. But this one's okay, obviously. So what we want to do now at this point is we are going to start reassembly. Now, one might say, well, how do you clock this? Well, GM's made this nice and easy for us. On every turbine housing, there's a set pin. You can see it right there. On every center cartridge, there's a reciprocal for that set pin. So what we're going to do is we're going to take, and very carefully so that we don't bang this up, we're going to drop this directly down in there, and we are going to line that set pin up with, if I can find it, sucks getting old, you can't see anymore. So what we've done is we've gone ahead and set that up. You heard it click. And then what we want to do is just hold this. We want to get in there and we want to make sure that everything spins nice and freely, which it does. So now what we're going to do is, I'm going to leave this off. We basically do the same exact process in reverse. Now, what I've done is before I took this off, I made a little mark. So I know where my bolt goes when reassembling this. So we're just going to take and line that up. Now, you can use a Sharpie or a grease pen, whatever you like. Now, I'm probably going to get a ton of emails on torque specs for everything, and those are available upon request when you purchase your Super-Core or any other turbocharger from RPM Motorsports. Now, how tight do we want this? We want it tight, but honestly, if you over tighten this, you're going to snap this bolt. So just give it a good snug down. It's not going to go anywhere. So now, again, what we want to do is put our wastegate actuator back on there, and just so that we can these are just bolts that we have in there so that the core stays together during shipping. So we're just going to use. We're now going to two of these bolts have washers because they do help hold the center cartridge to the compressor cover. that. Gotta remember which direction. Now we don't want to tighten that up all the way just yet. But you can see that this is going relatively quickly now, you know, through the magic of TV. We had some of these loosened up. Now I do want to reiterate, if we have bolts that are being stubborn, they don't want to come out, let's not break them off, let's not strip them. We do want to just make sure that we throw some penetrating oil on there and allow that to sit for a little while. So now what we're going to do is, without letting this flop around too much, we're going to go back and we're just going to tighten these up. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to realign our wastegate actuator. And you can see that this particular, because we've taken that off and we moved it, what we want to do is get this, and we want to butt it all the way up against this nut, and then we want to back this nut off about 2 turns. And then we're going to take this nut, we're going to put it back on there, and we're going to spin it up until it touches this. Now, what we want to do now is give this about 1 full turn of what we call preload, and then we're going to back this nut up against the wastegate armature, and we're going to take, and obviously number 10 open end wrench would have done a lot better for that. And then we're going to take our set and click it right back in there. All right, checking this along the way. Okay, we're still spinning freely. Everything looks good. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to reinstall our bypass valve. Now on these bypass valves, these are plastic. They can become brittle over time. I honestly would say, you know, just use a manual ratchet or tighten it down by hand like this, and then come back at it and give it just a little snug. Okay. Lastly, we're going to take and reinstall our wastegate actuator here. I'm sorry, our boost control solenoid. And then we're just going to reinstall, all of these lines are pre-fit. And once we have all of those on there, we're going to take and reset. All of these clamps. Alright. Now we've taken a Super-Core and it is back to fully functioning turbocharger that we can reinstall on the vehicle. Now, a couple things we want to talk about. And I get this a lot. Turbochargers. Do's and don'ts. This is now essentially a brand new turbocharger. The number one thing that will kill a turbocharger, it will cause your turbo to fail within 10 miles, is oil starvation. So when you're removing your oil feed line, during the disassembly process, let's make sure that you're not kinking that line in any way. You can gently move it out of the way, make sure you're never kinking that line. Oil drain problems will not essentially kill a turbocharger, but what it will cause is oil to back up in the compressor cover, and you typically get, blue smoke from the tailpipe, and that's usually due to some sort of blockage in the oil return line. Now, when reassembling a turbocharger, it's pretty difficult to get something actually in the oil return line. So 9 times out of 10, what we find is 2 mistakes are made. One, the gasket is not installed properly, and it's basically blocking the orifice to allow the oil to drain properly. Or 2, a gasket wasn't used, and some sort of high temp silicone was used, and when you push those 2 surfaces together, the silicone squishes out, closes up your hole, unbeknownst to you, and you have oil drainage issues. So, number 1 thing that will kill a brand new turbocharger, or any turbocharger for that matter, is oil starvation. The number 2 thing is oil contamination. We've had turbos come back to us, and we've cracked them open, and we've seen literally scoring on the center shaft, and that's due to particulates, due to dirty oil. And with dirty oil, obviously that'll kill any bearing in your motor, but turbos, because they spin at such a high speed, it doesn't take very long for that to happen. The other form of oil contamination is actually fuel in the oil, and this actually happens more often than you think. If you have a direct injection motor and you've got fuel injectors that are basically running with anywhere from 1 to 3,000 psi of fuel pressure behind them, if an injector hangs open for even a millisecond, that's a lot of fuel that gets inadvertently dumped into the system, and sometimes that fuel has nowhere to go but past the rings and into the bottom end. So with direct injection motors, I know that GM has the fantastic oil life meter on the dash. Honestly, we don't, here at RPM Motorsports, we do not want you to use that. We want you to change your oil every 3,000 miles. That's just an old school rule of thumb, and in case you have an injector hang open, or a paper filter tear and allow particulates past it, if you're changing your oil more frequently, you're ultimately going to be saving your turbocharger and ultimately the life of the motor. So those are just some kind of quick overviews, do's and don'ts, and things to look out for when putting this back on the vehicle. So what we want to do here is, this is basically ready to go back onto the vehicle. This particular turbocharger, is off of either a 2008 to 2010 Chevy Cobalt SS, the same model years 08 through 10 HHR SS, also a 2007-2009 Pontiac Solstice GXP, and a 2007 through 2010 Saturn Sky Redline, all with the LNF motors. So when you're putting this back together, obviously get some new gaskets. We we provide those through the website on RPM-Motorsports.com, and you got 4 15mm bolts here, or nuts there, and 4 17mm nuts on the backside. So as you can see, it didn't take us long at all to swap these over, and it's definitely something within the wheelhouse of most people. And obviously, if you've watched this video 3 times and you still don't feel comfortable, pay a professional to do it. They might charge you an hour of labor, but the $100 they're going to charge you, whatever it is, whatever their hourly rate is, probably well worth it, just for you to have peace of mind. Or send it to us and we'd be happy to do it for you. I think that's about it. So we've explained our new product, the Super-Cores, how to swap them over to your existing hardware. This is Martin with RPM Motorsports. Have a great day.